I would like to call to order the August 26, 2008 meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency. May we have the roll call, please?
Agency members: Draymond.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Chairman Najarian.
Here. Will you read your report, please?
Agenda for the August 26, 2008 regular meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, August 21, 2008 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Is there a
So
motion?
moved. Second.
Is there a second? No corrections, objections, or substitutions. The minutes will be submitted as approved. Next item, please.
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes, and members of the redevelopment agency may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the matter may be referred to staff or the executive director for investigation and report.
Thank you. I have a card from Herbert Milano. You have a proxy, too.
Good afternoon. My name is Herbert Milano, members of the Redevelopment Agency and city staff. As I said in the audience with regard to your previous topic, I was really amazed at the quality of the discussions that you all provided. And I see that behind those discussions is the issue of policy. What were the policies that you created in the past, and how do those policies need to be changed and adapted as there's a change in the economy? The suggestions by Mr. Najarian, I think, were absolutely excellent, and the overall discussion concerning is it temporary, is it full, should we look at all the pending projects that you have, I think goes at the heart of what I've been trying to talk to you for a very long time concerning how do you decide the major objectives that you have for the city. Behind those discussions, you have an issue of what are the overall major goals with regard to the city's makeup of housing, for example. Is it we're at 62% rental, 38% ownership, and if our objective is to increase the ownership because of the participation that it brings in terms of the new residents to the community, then you have one of the objectives being met by the decisions that you bring forth. In other words, you have to go back to the original ideas that you had when you were developing policy. And I think that is what I'm trying to bring to you when I bring up the concepts for the redevelopment agency and the city as a whole with regard to how you implement those policies. So I brought in one more time a presentation I made about 2.5 years ago with regard to the balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard generally comes in somewhere in between your financial measurements and the strategy implementation. And of course, it actually tries to meet a particular gap. Once you establish what your mission is, what your values are, what the vision it is that you have for the city, you're trying to come through with regard to the strategy that you're going to use to implement it. And so the idea here is, how do we communicate this to the general public? And in the case of today is, how do you communicate it to yourselves? Because if based upon your overall strategy that matches your vision, your decisions become a lot easier, because you're continually testing your decisions against that vision that you already established for yourself and the values that you already established. And I think that if you use that for your decision making, these decisions become a lot easier. The balanced scorecard translates focus. It will focus and it aligns and it measures. Generally, strategies fail, and only about 10% of strategies are successfully implemented, either both in private industry and in NCOs as well. There are generally certain barriers to strategy execution. Usually there's no vision that was clearly established. Or there's a people barrier. 25% of managers have incentives linked to strategy in general. There is a management barrier. 85% of executive teams spend less than 1 hour per month discussing strategy. And there's a resource barrier. 60% of organizations do not link budgets to strategy. Strategy then is a communication tool to communicate your strategy. It's a measurement system, and it's a strategic management system as well. The idea is that you're basically aligning vision and strategy to the customers, to your internal processes, and to internal employee learning and growth. In other words, you need to be able to look at 4 different things altogether whenever you make a decision. What's the financial impact? How will it affect your stakeholders? What are the internal processes that you have to create? And what is the learning that has to take place so that your employees can execute the strategy effectively? I'm running out of time here, but the whole idea behind this process is that you always take a look at your financial, your customer, your internal process, and the learning and growth in order to be able to execute it. So whenever you're faced with a particular objective that does not match your overall strategy, it makes it a lot easier for you to make a decision. And I think that is what's generally missing in most of these discussions, that most of your decisions appear to be isolated to an overall all-encompassing strategy that says, are we meeting these particular objectives? And it's my suggestion that perhaps you can start taking a look at in your future decisions, aligning your decisions this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have any other cards for oral communications, and I will close that segment of the agenda. Next item, please.
Next item on the business agenda is a public hearing. Director of Development Services regarding 130-space parking exception for the proposed relocation of Glendale Career College to 240 North Brand Boulevard. At 6A1 is a resolution certifying and adopting an addendum to a mitigated negative declaration and making findings to support substitute mitigation measure. And at 6A2 is a motion approving parking exception subject to comments and conditions from the agency.
Thank you. Mr. Lanzafame.
Mr. Chairman, members of the agency, on July 1st, we brought this proposal to you and asked if you would like us to investigate it further. You directed us to go ahead and do the environmental review, which we have done. Annette Vartani and Jackson from our office has been working with the applicant. She'll give you a quick review presentation on what our findings were and then our recommendation to approve this parking exception. Annette Vartani and Jackson.
Good afternoon, agency chair and members of the agency. As Mr. Lanzafame stated, Glendale Career College is requesting a 130-space parking exception at 240 North Brand Boulevard for the Orange Street parking garage. Although the code requires 130 spaces, the actual demand for parking is significantly less, with the new proposal requiring only 98 spaces for their maximum enrollment of 150 students. The current average usage at the Orange Street Garage is approximately 243 vehicles, not counting auto dealer vehicles. The Orange Street Garage is capacity 625 vehicles. When the MND was originally approved, the average usage was approximately 188 vehicles, not counting the auto dealer vehicles. The college's peak demand for 98 spaces can be easily accommodated in the garage. The originally adopted mitigation measures have been modified to reflect the new project. The maximum enrollment has been reduced from 425 to 150 students, and the maximum parking occupancy has been reduced from 138 to 98 spaces. This time, staff is recommending approval of the 130-space parking exception, subject to conditions and approval of the resolution adopting the addendum to the MND and substituted mitigation measures. Staff is available to answer any questions, and the applicant is also here.
Okay, this is a public hearing, so I will open the public hearing to...
Clarification. In our staff report, we said that this was a 3-year exception. Actually, the way the motion is drafted is they must take advantage of the parking exception within 3 years. Otherwise, it will terminate. If they do, then it would be under the remaining conditions there, that they buy key cards, that they keep their enrollment down to 150, that they don't occupy any more space that's in this original lease. If they should violate any of those, staff would bring it back to you for a revocation hearing, much like we discussed last week with the yoga studio.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Yusefian?
We got the staff report. We got the staff report put on our desk. It's written August 26, 2008, and has a little matrix attached to it. I do not see anywhere on this matrix 96, 98 parking spaces.
The 98 parking...
There's 130 parking spaces. Where do I
That is the code-required parking. The 98 spaces
No, it says code-required parking. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
Okay.
here's what I have. It says code-required parking space, 237 spaces. Current request is 149 spaces. Credit for previous use is 118 spaces. Former use was 19 spaces. It says storage of parking spaces, code-required parking is 119, so basically it's 130 spaces. There's no 96 in here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the agency,
I want to know which one is
what
the
this is...
accurate numbers.
What this is telling you is actually what the code requires. The 98 spaces is generated from, because of the limited number of students and when they might be on site, that's the practical number. We have to follow the code, and we've got to provide for the code number of spaces. What staff is telling you is that, in reality, there will be no more than 98 people utilizing this parking exception at one time.
So the parking exception is for what? Is it for 98 spaces, or is it for 130 spaces?
For 130. You need to adopt a parking exception for the code-required parking. As justification for that, we're telling you that practically there's only 98 spaces that would be used at any one time.
Okay, any other questions before we go to the public? I have 2 cards. We'll have questions for you afterwards.
Okay.
Mitchell first.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the agency, city staff. Mitchell first, representing Glendale Career College today. Hope you all had a good summer. I enjoyed mine immensely.
It's over?
It's over, yeah. I think next week my kids are going back to school, so it's definitely over for me, that's for sure. I know the last couple times that I've appeared before you all, I share with you a lot about our company and school's history, so I don't want to share that again, just here to answer any questions, although this time I just want to say a special thanks to city staff. Mr. Lanzafame, Annette, Vartanian, Jackson has been wonderful in this process, and I appreciate their good help a lot. I think they've continued that thought that Glendale is a business-friendly community, and we do appreciate that. So again, I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
I have a question, and I know we had talked about some conditions, something that I thought I had mentioned, but I don't see it down here, is the requirement that the students park at the uppermost levels of the structure. Do you have a problem with that, if you require the students to do so?
You know, I don't, and I remember you saying that, Mr. Chair, and we don't have an issue with that.
That's not in our conditions, is it? Was that left out?
No, it's not. We omit it. That's our error.
I mean, as I don't mean to displace the car dealers, but as highest available.
Yeah, every effort to park on the highest available space.
Okay, any questions of Mr. First? Okay, thank you. My next speaker is Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, members of the Redevelopment Agency. My name is Herbert Milano, and city staff. I'm going to bring back the whole question with regard to what were the objectives of creating and setting up the municipal code as it is. There is a reason why the city has gone through the extent, and planning has gone through the extent of establishing a certain amount of parking requirement for entities that come into any particular area. What was the purpose of the parking garage in the first place? What I'm finding this quite disconcerting right now.
Okay, just hold on a second, Mr. Malano. We'll reset your time. Mr. Kasakian?
Could you please go to the back room?
Secret yourself or
Sequester.
sequester? Secret means...
Right.
Okay. Wherever you want to start, Mr. Malano.
Thank you very much. I'm basically asking the redevelopment agency to reconsider the reasons why you set, or the city has set the municipal code the way it is. The reason why we have the parking requirements as have been set. There's a reason for that, right? And we need to revisit the original goals of why we set them that way. We also need to take a look at what was the original purpose of the parking garage and what it was meant to serve. And I can tell you that I have personally experienced in a very discomforting and frustrating way what generally has occurred in the parking areas, on-street parking, on California, gone all the way through areas beyond, Louise and Kenwood and Isabel and so forth. So it is these parking garages have a specific purpose. And obviously one of the primary purposes of that particular orange parking garage is to serve the Alex Theater. And it is also supposed to serve perhaps the customers of the other merchants that are in the area. But I have seen way too many exceptions being given, as if the parking spaces were currency that you use to be able to obtain and do favors for individuals who come to you for assistance. And I don't think that those parking spaces should be used in that manner. Look, for a very long time, you used 180 parking spaces for the auto dealerships. And I remember sitting here when the owners of Portos came to you clamoring for additional space at an affordable price for them to be able to provide it for their employees. And I remember she was denied. So here is a situation of established merchants, of a need of the community to be able to make sure that there is sufficient parking space available, to make sure that on-street parking becomes available to the residents on a continual basis. And I basically came here before to ask you what is going to be the overall impact as projected with regard to on-street parking in the area. And I don't see any answers to those questions. Because eventually, with only 20% of the parking space available according to that report, you could very easily find yourselves in a situation where basically you maximize it. Okay, so 2 years or 3 years from now, once you start maximizing, what then? What do you do then? What's the decision? What's the alternative? I see way too many decisions being made on the objectives of bypassing the municipal code to be able to give variances to parking again and again. And it seems to me, in my opinion, that is the main currency that you use to obtain and provide favors to people who are supporting you in one way or another. And I know it may seem incredibly harsh, but that is the feeling that I get, because the frustration that I feel, with regard to my tenants in the area, is a real one. I see it continually. And it is my hope that you guys think carefully about the alternatives in case this parking garage is topped out.
Thank you. I don't have any other cards from members of the public. I will close the public hearing. Go to my colleagues for questions or clarification.
On motions?
Mr. Yusefian.
The exercise place, how many parking spaces is required?
24-hour fitness.
No, the family fitness? It's still in the building, right?
They
Still in the
may,
building, but I don't know if they have a parking exception.
They must have.
I think they have a parking exception from decades ago.
What is the requirement for that size?
That, we would have to check. I know we had it in a prior report.
Is it the same plate? Is it 29,000 square feet, second plate? They have the whole...
As I recall, when they came in, though, we had old standards. Now they would come under new standards. We've addressed these 24-hour fitness type facilities that would have a much higher parking standard than when they went in. That was part of the problem, is these things didn't exist. At least they weren't known to have the impact they have when that business went in.
Because the last time, I think, my recollection is correct, when last time the Glendale Career College came in with the number of parking they needed, all combined was running into like 600 parking spaces, something of that nature. I mean, it was some ridiculous number.
I think when you added both of the uses,
Yes.
because they were both assembly uses,
Right.
I'll rely on you.
Okay.
I can't remember.
All right. I have a question from our traffic transportation guy.
Mr. Mitchell?
Sitting back there, so I thought might as well ask him a question so he won't feel that he wasted his time coming here. There's a study here. Was the study done by some traffic and transportation company, or did you verify that?
Chairman,
Keiko and Company, or anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, members of the agency, Mr. Yosefian, it was done in-house. It was largely done first with the applicant and redevelopment staff, but then I reviewed it and wrote a separate staff report to it and concur with the findings.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. I'm not clear how this, how these credits work out. This current use is just a small portion of the remaining available space, correct? About 7,000 square feet.
Yes.
Let's say that the rest of that floor, first floor, well, this is basement use.
This is the basement.
Say the first floor is used for a whatever reasonable use we could anticipate.
Office Max.
Office Max. What is Office Max going to come to us for in terms of? I'm just concerned that on this one building, there's just I mean, we're doing it bit by bit by bit, but there's just a huge number of parking that is giving exception, that we're giving exceptions to.
I'm going to try, I wish the planning director were here, so I'm going to give it a try. Many of these buildings were built before we had a parking code. And so what we've done is looked at the usage and where are people finding parking spaces with the parking that's available for the use that was there. The prior use was retail. And so when Office Max comes in as a retail use, we would say that they get the credit for all of those parking spaces that were being found prior to the code. So they would require zero. They would not have to come to you for any kind of parking exception.
But you
We would
counting
assume
those
that they were parking the prior use, and that a new use that comes in, same type of use, they would continue to find those same parking spaces. And
Ad
that's
infinitum.
that's
As
the
long as
best.
the use remains the
As
same.
long as the use remains the same. And if you need to go further into the philosophy or theory, that I'd need the planning director.
And previously, we have placed a premium, have we not, on providing spaces in these garages. I know we did it with the folks that wanted to park at the marketplace. We would let them park, and they'd buy their monthly pass, but there'd be an additional premium.
We did that on one project. It was the DPSS project, where there was no parking on site, and they were going to park in the marketplace. They were going to buy the pass, and it was a small premium. It was $13.50 a month, I believe. Premium.
Well, I look forward to really getting into the nuts and bolts of any future parking exception request. I don't know how soon that's coming before us, Office Max, but I'm getting the sense that we're just really overloading this, whereas we previously had explained those problems to the owners, and based on that, they were going to, if you recall, do a planned development that which would have parking and completely upgrade that block. So, okay, but this is just for the career college. Mr. Yosefian.
Hate to go back to this again. 118 spaces for former cost plus retail space. That's what it was there before. You use this number to deduct from the code requirement for this office space. So how many times do you count the same ghost parking spaces?
Well, this was on the previous request, and so we start over. We're at 6,900 square feet.
That's the old school they were going to put.
Okay.
Administrative offices is 149 spaces is what's needed. Actually, this is the classroom space, is what we calculated.
So
this current use
so
just in the
Office Max
basement-
is going to require 118 spaces,
Well,
or 100 spaces.
yes. That's what the code would require, and the code would give them that credit because it's retail for retail. So the code is assuming that...
So it
their
would
park-
not require,
It would not require,
it would not require a waiver.
that is correct.
So that's automatic. So
Any
you're not going to
retail or less intense use, if it became office.
Okay, so there's 100 units there, there's 130 there, there's another, that's the same thing that we saw last
Giving
time.
away money today. Okay, is there a motion? Mr. Quintero?
Yeah, I'm going to make the motion at 6A1, and before I do, let me say I continue to think this is a great use of the space. It's going into the basement, which means we're going to have retail at ground level. I also was in that parking structure twice, once to the used bookstore Thursday afternoon, and another time during the week in the morning for a different purpose. The parking structure was empty. Thursday afternoon at, I guess, was about 2:30 empty, and on the morning, empty. So I think we're still in very good shape in terms of that particular parking structure, and that's why it's there, to help business have a place to park. So I'll move 6A1.
Mr. Draymond?
I sense Mr. Weaver probably was going to second it. I just wanted to ask one, the comment just jogged a thought. I just want to make sure that, because I missed it when I went through this, when we talked about this last time, we were not just talking about we will secure the spaces there, but that we will require parking to be there.
That is correct, and what we would do, and this to some extent would address the concerns that Mr. Milano had. One of the mitigation measures is that we will track the usage of students. If we find one or two students are using the cards, or at off hours, then we would bring that back to you for revocation.
The reason I raised the point is that I think I used that parking structure far more than even what Councilmember Quintero was talking about. I use that facility all the time. And it is at the height of lunchtime, at the height of dinner hour, on a Friday evening, you name the time, it is mostly empty. And now one could say that one of the reasons it's empty is because the people who are supposed to be using it aren't using it, but they're out in the neighborhood parking. I don't know that that's so. Mr. Milano has raised the issue. It may be so. But one of the reasons I'm willing to support this, aside from the fact that I'm already on the record and as thinking this is a very good use for this, and it allows us to be able to move a traditional type of retail into the upper floor, or the main floor, I guess you'd say. But in any case, is that we're going to require them to use this structure. And if they're not using it, we'll know about it. And then that will become a means of looking at a revocation, possibly. So that is the other reason why. And I'm sorry, Mr. Weaver, to have interrupted you, but I just...
I'll second it with a couple comments. One, I use that garage frequently, too, at least twice a week during the lunchtime hour. And if I had a baseball and I was on level 3 or 4, I could throw it the length and not hit a car. Empty.
Could you have thrown it the length?
Huh?
Could you have, just out of curiosity?
Thrown baseball
the length of that parking
Well,
lot?
I'd had to get some march in the ceilings there, but
Out of curiosity.
no, I could hit that length. But the point is, it's empty. Even level 2 at many times is empty, just like you've seen, Mr. Draymond. And just to set the record straight, Glendale Career College has never given me a campaign donation. In fact, they've had me give their keynote addresses a number of times, and they never paid me a penny to do it. So I have no problems voting for this. We're getting some guaranteed income into the parking fund by doing this.
Okay, motion and a second. Mr. Yusefian.
I'll be voting against it, and nothing against Glendale Career College. I have the same reservations about this at this time as I had with the previous project earlier on. I was able to overcome that on the basis that it was for a short period of time, 3 years, and they were going to move into a new location on San Fernando Road, a more permanent location. And I could justify it in my mind because we do the same thing on a temporary basis for auto dealers or any other businesses. So I could see that for a short period of time. This is not that short period of time. It is going to be